Okay, welcome to this week's episode of the Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name's Sol.
I'm Jamie.
This week we have on James Frost, who is founder of Flaming Phoenix, which is a bar for adventure and the toughest of endurance challenges, as said on the website. But more importantly, Jamie, what can we expect from James, the founder of such an interesting company?
Yeah, definitely a bit of a different episode today, talking about his product and his brand. But I think it's going to be a fascinating episode. The first key thing I'm looking forward to is finding out how his product was inspired by Syrian refugees. The second is how he's on a mission to create the world's #1 food aid supplier. And thirdly, how to make six-figure mistakes and know how to recover.
Absolutely love it. Let's get into the episode. And just before we do, if you're listening right now, very much appreciate you taking your time to watch this episode. And we would very much appreciate if you could just go on and either if you're on YouTube, give us a like, or if you're on Spotify or Apple Music, just give us a quick subscribe because we have so many amazing listeners and we would really appreciate you subscribing so you can catch more inspirational stories from the people we have on our podcast. Thanks very much for your time and let's get into the episode.
Well, thank you for coming on, James. A really cool conversation we're going to have around your brand today. And what we always like to do when someone comes on with a brand and a product is put it back to them that if they were to appear on, say, something like a Dragon's Den, what would kind of like a 1-minute product pitch or brand pitch look like in Dragon's Den?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on, lads.
Love it. I love it.
It's been really too long. I feel like when you listen to too many podcasts yourself, you can probably garner a few things or copy and paste a few things that you like. Dragon's Den. This is a common one that you get asked about when you're in the smoking area or you're on a night out after a few drinks. Like, why don't you go on Dragon's Den? I haven't been asked to do the sort of elevator pitch for it, but in a nutshell, and I'll probably even make it less long than Dragon's Den because our attention spans these days are probably more TikTok sized now. But I would say it's unique energy bars for people doing the world's toughest challenges. So it's for people running across the Sahara deserts, people climbing Mount Everest, people rowing the Atlantic, rather than necessarily running a half marathon on a Sunday.
I love it. I love it. Okay. And with that elevator pitch, I'm intrigued. How does someone get into that? Tell us where it all started. I want to hear where did the idea for this come from, mate?
So that's a terrible question, considering I sent you a few voice notes before this call, and one of the things, and I'm sure you can judge by the length of those voice notes, that it is quite hard to sort of sum it up briefly. But I'll give you the highlights, and then I guess you guys can dig into any granularities that you see fit. But essentially, I wanted to start, and I'd say did start, a food ration company at university. So I was trying to sell food rations to charities and NGOs globally that deal with sort of humanitarian crises, and developed this product and realized, like many innovations, that the products probably had even more applicability into a different market. So just found my product market fit somewhere slightly else, and that can confuse quite a few people. But the best anecdote that I sort of give about this is the story of how Viagra was invented. I'm not sure if your chaps are familiar, but essentially Viagra was initially developed to lower men's blood pressure. So they did a trial study and gave lots of Viagra out to lots of men. And whilst they found that they had no impact on their blood pressure, the people in the trial refused to give the supplements back, the Viagra, and they found out it had a much sort of a better application elsewhere. So I guess it's quite common that innovations for some area have more applicability elsewhere.
Wow, yeah, I mean, I never knew that story, so fair play. But then how does that kind of evolve then into, because I guess at the moment I'm aware of products like a Huel or something like that, right? Which I don't know if I'm mentioning like a direct competitor or anything there, but I know they're in kind of the drink space kind of thing, and it's got all the nutrients around like a single meal in one single drink. Was it something that you saw as a potential opportunity down that route, but doing it into a bar, or where did that idea strike that you were like, this is exactly what I want to do and what I want to create?
Yes, not not too dissimilar. I think I basically during lockdown, because I feel like most of the people on your podcast normally come up with their good ideas during COVID, so it's going to make me sound generic. One of my friends, or someone that I was connected with on Facebook, was undertaking a charity challenge called the Food Ration Challenge, basically raising money, eating the same food rations given to Syrian refugees in the UK for about a week. And they were posting these photos every day, eating these beautiful looking rations, which obviously were not very nutritious at all, not very tasty, by the looks of it anyway, et cetera, et cetera, and had a lot of other sort of misgivings or failings in a number of aspects. And it just led me down that sort of rabbit hole of investigating what food rations and food aid was provided to people in need, whether that's in the Ukraine afflicted by war or countries afflicted by famine, et cetera, where local food wasn't available. And that's when I found that there wasn't really any sort of nutritional solutions in this space. And I guess it sort of comes back to that sort of idea that there are no adults, because you should think that there would be like a perfect solution for people suffering from moderate or acute malnutrition. And that's when I decided to create Phoenix bars, which would obviously, as you mentioned, Jamie, be incredibly nutritious, but also from researching into it, there was a lot of other things that you had to consider as well, like dietary requirements, local palatability as well, and actually getting people to consume the product, shelf life, specific textures, etc., etc. So I guess that's how I came up with the initial concept of Phoenix Bars.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, as an initial concept, it sounds absolutely spot on, but there's a massive leap then from actually making that into a reality. And I always look at products like that, and I'm like, how on earth do you actually turn something like that into, a product that has all of these nutrients in a single little bar? So talk to us about how that actually became a reality and how these bars actually now physically exist.
Sure. I think it was a case of spending a lot of time on Excel spreadsheets trying to balance 26 different macro and micronutrients um, with varying ingredient quantities, which, as someone who's actually not, as someone who's very interested in nutrition and has evidently learned a lot from running a company in this space for the last 4 years, I didn't have that necessary sort of scientific background to do it. So I guess luckily I had an understanding of, or I just tried to create like a minimum viable concept, or just try get to the next sort of stage of what I was trying to do rather than think too far ahead. So it came up, I did that and got it pretty much as close as possible. I think it was lacking in a couple of vitamins and minerals. And then I started making these bars at home, actually, which obviously was not the plan for the long term, and donating them to homeless shelters around the UK. So again, sort of get that proof of concept that they were tasty, nutritious, etc., and just build a bit more sort of momentum. And that's from there helped me raise some further funding, which essentially allowed for the sciencey boring stuff to get involved with manufacturers, etc. And then lo and behold, probably too many months later, as it unfortunately takes with these sorts of things, the physical proper concept of Phoenix Buzz was developed.
So interesting. And then, how even talking about, we love the kind of the day-to-day stuff, but then the kind of mindset thing. How did you get over actually launching this? And was it a hard step, or was it just a natural progression of the hard work and research that you'd done previously?
I think that the idea is almost like too big to comprehend in terms of like being the goal was to be the world's number one like food ration and food aid supplier, which I did think was very attainable. But it almost comes back to that idea that it's a lot easier to sort of aim super high rather than sort of in the middle to aim for average. I know that's something that you've spoken about a couple of times, Sol, because everyone sort of aims for not mediocre, but slightly above mediocre because they think it's more attainable, but everyone's aiming there. So almost just being sort of having that ignorance or naivety, and just sort of like, yeah, putting your head down, following your curiosity, and just trying to get to the next steps. Probably helped me out quite a lot. So yeah, I mean, it was certainly interesting speaking to a lot of people that were, say, head of food security and international development in the UK, or the head of nutrition for the World Food Programme, etc. That's the sort of things that become a bit more common after a while, and I guess it is just like practice. Practice makes perfect, and you do get used to it from that perspective. But yeah, it was certainly just head down. I guess not to think too far ahead, which can be a good thing, and it also can be a bad thing as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So where does your kind of expertise lie within it? Because you mentioned that it's something that you've had to learn a lot over the last 4 years, like actually on the job whilst running the company. So when you came into it, did you think, I'm gonna be good at building up a brand, I'm gonna know how to scale this, or was it in the kind of food side of the business? Where did you think that this aligns well with my skills, or was it purely the fact that it was a really good idea and you were like, I'm gonna make this work?
I think not too dissimilar to at least what I understand at a high level about how you've gone about your career so far, Jamie. Obviously, I think I think just hunger and appetite to learn, and like a real sort of interest in getting better, and just not doing tough things, but just like doing the thing. I mean, to flip it back onto you with you obviously had a very good fundamental understanding and love of sport, watching it most weekends, etc., etc. But I'm sure you're aware that a lot of other people like to do that as well. And what differentiates
Yeah.
you and how you've got to where you are today is the sort of willingness to actually do something about it, and the understanding of the sport is a couple of percent of the whole picture. So I think actually the willingness to do it was something that I wanted to do, and then sort of along the way, each step of the way, that you just sort of learn and pick up new different skills as you sort of up each level. So, for instance, at the moment, my skill is, now that I've got a physical product that I am selling, it's really working out how to negotiate, how to sell products, how to market products. Previously, maybe it was more the sciencey stuff. In the middle somewhere, it was fundraising, for instance. You also pick up somewhere in between as well, that sort of, dare I say, that for lack of a better term, that work-life balance of being an entrepreneur or being your own boss, etc. So I think it is just like, yeah, showing a willingness to learn, and try things at each step of the way, and yeah, just not really stop.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely spot on. It's something I massively like concur with, is the whole idea of actually learning like as you go. I think I was in quite a privileged position because I was learning from people who had already kind of made it. They were in like the right positions, and I could kind of be underneath them. But any mistakes that I kind of made, didn't have like a massive like dramatic effect on the whole organization because I was just working under people. I wasn't the guy leading the charge. And I think probably the biggest difference with what you're doing is this is all you, right? It's your brand. You're the one right at the top of it. You're the one trying to make everything happen. So if you make a big mistake, come up with a brand or some kind of marketing plan that's absolutely rubbish and doesn't have any success, then it all comes back to it affects the whole entire organization and project really. So how have you kind of coped with that, and what have you maybe found, I guess the hardest parts really about building a brand by yourself and having to learn it while you go? And I guess you must have made mistakes along the way, right? Which, as I'm sure all three of us agree, is never a bad thing, but has maybe a more dramatic effect on your project as a whole.
I think it depends on how you look at it, Jamie, because equally, if I make a mistake, the only person that really suffers, I guess to an extent, is me. Obviously, now that I have loyal and dedicated customers, maybe that's something that's a bit more pressure. And from speaking to slightly bigger time entrepreneurs in this space, or just more broadly, I guess when you level up again and you've got staff on a payroll and you need to make sure that you're earning enough, or the company's earning enough to pay them, that's probably a bit more pressure. Yeah, glaring mistakes that come to mind. Yes, obviously, I think, and I guess it comes back to the regrets thing that you mentioned about, that we were talking about off podcast, about, I don't know, it's they are learning mistakes, and as one of my mentors says, I think I made a mistake that was probably worth around like five figures, and he was just like, "You're going to make mistakes when you get better that are going to be 6 figures, and then they're going to be 7 figures, etc., etc. It is kind of the cost of doing business that you make a mistake, and dusting yourself off that, which I still find quite tough, maybe relatively. I think like a lot of my time at the moment is spent on sales calls or sales, as Sol can probably relate to at the moment, about albeit so you don't post too much about getting rejected on your channel. I'd love to see a couple of rejections. I hope they're in there.
It happens. It happens a lot.
And yeah, I think just that initial sort of rejection, even though you completely understand that as a sales funnel, you only need to really convert like 1 or 2 out of 10 leads, and that's pretty good. Or you're still, because I'm really sort of niching down on my product and my brand, I'm just trying to find those needles in that haystack that want the best sort of nutrition for extreme adventures and are willing to pay for that as well. So that's what I'm trying to do. But even when you get a rejection, it's that, I don't know, it sort of just shakes you up for probably not even more than 5 minutes, and it's just annoying because of the fact that you shouldn't be upset, or it shouldn't put you off, because it's not the rejection, it's how you deal with it. But I feel like it does probably get easier and easier. I'm going to flip it back to Sol, because I feel like you've been very quiet, Sol. Talk to me about how you would deal with rejection on one of your calls, and if you've had any sort of practical tips on what your relationship looks like with that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because it's actually my main problem right now, which is to not take it personally. Because especially, I mean, I think for both of us, but I obviously have a lot of conversations where they're basically saying like, I don't want to work with you. And that's really tough to have. But I think dealing with it in terms of thinking, okay, look, what I see is someone hasn't actually seen the alignment with this, but at the end of the day, it's not the worst thing in the world, because there's plenty more opportunities to come. And I think I'm now starting to think that, and then also to not take it personally is very helpful as well. So yeah, I think those are the 2 anecdotes that I like. Does that echo?
Absolutely. I think fundamentally it completely makes sense not to take it personally, but I still think the personal aspect of it is innately hard not to take, unfortunately. And I think people also buy from people as well. So I think it's quite important to make this all about me, because it's my podcast. Even when you're selling goods, I guess, rather than services, as much as I'd love to sell high ticket services, because I think that would be a lot easier to handle than sort of small, low value goods. I say low value in inverted commas, it's obviously a luxury item. But people do buy from people as well. And I think building those relationships with individuals rather than sort of that exchange of goods and commerce is something that's quite important for me to work on. And again, we were mentioning off podcast, because we had such a good conversation off podcast, that a lot of my time at the moment is spent at in-person events, looking people in the eyes, shaking hands, and sort of building that relationship and that rapport, because again, people buy from people, and you can have a really good product, but it really does help if someone likes you and they're willing to buy from you as well.
And I love that, because that was one of the first reasons why I wanted to get you on the podcast, is because like we built up that rapport, like even before me knowing what the business was. And I think a lot of people often miss that part in business. They miss the people part. And I think it's something you do very well. So is there any way you can actually operationalize how to be more charismatic and how to be more of a people's person, so that someone listening might be able to actually improve their business venture by becoming more of a person someone buys from?
That's not the question I thought you were going to ask. When you said the word operationalize, I was going to say I thought you were going to say, how can you operationalize your business so that you can move out to Dubai and just outsource all of the
That would be
aspects of it. And I do think about that a lot when I'm sort of in Dorset, as I was last night at about 11 p.m. And Sol's sort of tapping away at a few keyboards, earning a few pounds out in Dubai from doing about an hour's sort of calls a day, and I'm sort of grinding, selling flapjacks. It's definitely an interesting mix. So someone's going to do both. I think charisma. I think it is practice makes perfect. I've probably been to about 30 or 40 in-person events, and I will never forget my first in-person event, because I was rubbish at being a salesman. I think I stood there for like 2 or 3 hours and sold 2 energy bars, 2 Phoenix bars, energy bars, flapjacks, Phoenix bars, etc. And I was just not dragging I mean, it depends how granular you want to go into it, and how sort of, yeah, how applicable it is to your listeners. But little things like actually when someone walks past your table at a running show or an expo, actually having the confidence to like almost heckle them and drag them in for a conversation and convert them into buying is a skill in itself, and just being able to do that over and over again. I mean, there's small rules like no phones, no eating, no sitting down. So just like, and I guess the more and more you sell, the more and more confidence you have as well, which I'm sure you're finding as well. So like when you know you can add value to these people, and you did a really good Instagram short on this actually, which I think about a lot, but more so when you're selling a product at the start or selling a service at the start, you can come across as a bit desperate to just get that first one and that's obviously not very good for selling. And I found my selling's improved a lot, so whether that's in person or over the phone. When you're a bit more just like relaxed, languid, having a conversation, you know you can add value to them, and it's almost like you leave it up to them whether they want this or not. And you've got your list of people that you can call that can benefit, and you're playing hard to get almost in a way, but I guess somewhat deliberately, somewhat undeliberately as well. I guess charismatic, practice makes perfect. You've got to practice the skill. If you're doing it wrong, it's because it's a skill error, and the only way you can do it is trying it and getting it wrong. I think that would probably be my biggest answer.
I love it, mate. And I think that's it, that echoes with me the practice part, because I have a lot of people who come to me and say, I didn't convert my first sale, and I'm like, well, that's because it's your first sale, right? You need to go through the reps and go through that, which is super interesting. And I actually want to take it in a slightly different direction, the conversation, because there's a few other things that I want to make sure we get out of you. And one of the things is, it feels like you're part of, and this is our favorite conversation on the podcast, but I think you've got such a good angle on it. It's, you're part of this world where I'm sure every single one of your friends has chucked themselves into corporate and has chucked themselves into that life. And I'm not even asking you to start belittling that life, but why did you never consider that? Why did you always go, okay, look, I'm going to go down this route, or why did you decide that that was the route you were going to go down?
I think I've always innately had a predilection for entrepreneurship and being a little bit different, or as my friends would probably say, a bit weird. So I think most of them are actually not surprised that I'm doing something like this. Again, I never really made a conscious decision. I was quite fortunate, and again, I don't think it's going to be that helpful for your listeners. Maybe it will. But I sort of had this idea and concept at university, and was doing sort of obviously both at the same time, trying to develop this passion project, side hustle, call it what you want, while studying my degree, and sort of just decided that I was going to live at home and pursue this after university, because it got to a stage where I was trying to do uni, trying to do internships, and trying to do Phoenix, and then I just had to double down on Phoenix at some point and realize that. And yeah, I just did that. And again, it is just a snowballing effect of you make one decision and it really just does compound. So I guess that's how it went into it. I mean, I have had internships before, but my fundamental understanding of what, and I actually think this is like one of my severe deficiencies. I'm not sure, Jamie, if you've had a proper job before you were passionate about the sport, but Sol, I know famously you have. But I don't really have those necessary sort of late nights working for someone else's experiences with not toxic culture, but like very mundane culture that I can reflect on. I think it would actually be quite beneficial for me to sometimes reflect on it. But whenever I'm having a bad time with Phoenix, one of my mentors always says, we'll jot down like 5 or 6 other things that you'd rather be doing and write down exactly what that looks like, career-wise, etc. And that's generally a pretty good way to snap myself out of thinking, I wish I wasn't doing this. And it's not all roses and all of that sort of stuff, as we were talking about with Jamie's anecdote, driving down to, or getting the train down to Peterborough. It's not always fun. And I think that's something to remember and to bear in mind, because I think a lot of other people who are sitting on I think generally, actually, people in the 9 to 5s look at the entrepreneurs and think that they're always having a very fun time, as much as like what they're doing is silly, and it's certainly not the case.
It's very funny you say that though, because there's a lot of people out here that who have are in the same position as you and say, you know, I have no idea what a 9 to 5 looks like. I have no idea what that world actually looks like. And I just think we should run a social experiment where we just put them all in to a 9 to 5 for a few weeks so that they max their happiness by another 20% because they realise what they're actually missing out on.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think from my experience, I actually worked for Hollister and Morrison's before I went actually down the sports route. Obviously, two massive corporations, and I think now, like every time I look back on it, I'm like, wow, like, I could never have stuck in a big organisation like that. And I think now the three of us, obviously here, all being self-employed, etc., we can definitely speak of all the kind of pros of it and how much we like love that side of things. But I think it's always important to maybe mention, and we've talked about rejection already, but there's other like hard bits that come with it, and maybe pressure that you put on yourself and things like that. So of course there's all the glitz and glam of it, but that's not always the reality, as all three of us know. So maybe just give a bit of an insight into kind of the biggest challenges that you have, and maybe times where you think, God, this is tough, just to give people a word of warning if they are considering taking a route like this.
How long have you got? I think, oh God, that's a good question. I think you guys need to let your podcast guests prepare a bit more for these questions. God, off the top of my head, at the moment, I think dealing with third parties, dealing with things that are outside of your control can be a bit frustrating with regards to making the product. That's not the, so like manufacturing issues, which is obviously not the fun, juicy stuff that you want to get into. I think probably as a solo entrepreneur, it's a fair amount of time by yourself, especially on the road. You do have to just get comfortable with your own sort of nomenclature, like your own sort of thoughts that come up and the own texture of your mind, which is good. It gives you a lot of good time to think and reflect. But yeah, doing a lot of traveling for work to visit shops that want to stock my products, or events and marketing opportunities to actually sell my products out. So I guess travel, obviously, again, I feel like I'm going to probably be repeating a lot of what your guests have said, but things like missing social occasions, feels like as business gets better and better, you have more good opportunities, but you actually miss more and more things. So at the time, and I guess it comes back to what we're talking about with the rejection thing, Sol, about like not taking it personally. When I realized that there's like a diary clash of like me having to fly to Tenerife to visit loads of people that are going to row the Atlantic, because there's going to be people next year that want to buy my bars, and that there's loads of people this year buying my bars, and I miss one of my close mates' birthdays. That's at the top for the first like 10 minutes. It's like kind of gutting, or you're at least like really thinking about what you should be doing. But then you realize that you've got plenty more opportunities to socialize as well. And so, yeah, I'd say probably social aspects. But again, I don't think, when you actually think about it deeply, that's not a big sacrifice, because you can socialize really whenever you want. And there is a lot more sort of time and opportunity for that. And I think just now that you're dealing with customers as well, one of the things I actually do struggle with at the moment, which is what I was thinking about a lot, is all my work is pretty much on my phone, with like emails, social media, Instagram messages on my like company's Instagram messages. And I find myself very quickly switching between sort of like Flaming Phoenix Instagram and my personal Instagram. So my screen time is actually dreadful. And it's something that I'm really struggling to get rid of, because work and social media, and because like, even when I'm need to check my orders for how many people have bought my bars and fulfill that, it's just like spiking your dopamine constantly, and it's something you have to keep checking on to make sure they get delivered in time. So that's again another frustration. There's nothing like really in what I've said in the last 5 minutes that I think will probably make the highlights reel for the podcast or the Instagram note, but that's my sort of initial musings.
Super interesting. And one of the, I mean, almost one of the questions that I wanted to also ask was, again, on something you mentioned about mentors, because we hadn't even spoken about that, but clearly that is playing a big role in everything you're just talking about there, because you said it a few times, and it strikes me that if you've mentioned it a few times, it must be quite a significant part of your business journey. So tell us a bit more about mentorship in your life.
I think being not confident, but like always being quite comfortable to fail or admit that I don't know enough, or being quite malleable with my thoughts or beliefs has been a super strength for me, at least. So I've never been afraid of asking for help, advice, very similar to Jamie's journey and story, again, to put it back into Jamie's court. And yeah, I probably started out listening to too many people's thoughts and advice at the start of setting up my company, and just getting more experienced people that have been there, done that in a similar space, or just asking for help, asking if anyone knows anything, and doing that on repeat gave me a really good head start, because warm introductions are so important into getting sales, getting funding, getting support, etc. Getting better mentorship from someone who's built a food and nutrition company, etc. So that's something I've always been exploring. And then I probably, over time, doing this for a couple of years now, you sort of whittle it down to maybe 2 or 3 mentors that you speak to on a weekly, bi-weekly basis that you really trust. Because when you ask for lots of advice at the start, you can sort of not pick and choose, but action and not action some of the advice that you take. And when you start sort of actioning that advice and it works or it doesn't work, and you do that again and again and again, there are mentors now that I have that I just don't really question as much what they're telling me, just because of the facts that every time that they've told me to do something, it's really worked in spades, even though that there's been a lot of friction when they've suggested I do X, Y, and Z, like drive to Dorset to go and sell my bars on a Saturday night rather than going out. And so yeah, I think mentorship is really important, and I think anyone, or at least most people, can really benefit from a good mentor.
Love that. Yeah, such an important message. It's a topic that we've explored a few times, but the reasons you've given there are exactly why we like to talk about it, because it is so important, really. And all 3 of us, I guess, have clearly benefited from the idea of having mentors a lot, right? But so just before Soul wraps up, it'd be interesting to get a view for people listening, and this is why we always like to speak to people who are kind of at the start of a journey or still in their 20s and building something up. What can we expect to see from you in the future in terms of going down this path, and where is Flaming Phoenix going as a brand?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think I'm not planning or thinking too far ahead. I mean, you have loose goals in your mind of where you are and where you'd like to be, and maybe my initial experience of starting a company has made me sort of not get too hell-bent on a specific direction. I think obviously being that sort of product that's associated with people that climb Mount Everest, run Marathon des Sables, row the Atlantic is probably the number one thing. So just like the number one nutritional products for people doing the hardest things, if you're going to the North Pole, South Pole, etc. But equally, I've had a lot of success again in other markets recently, in terms of people that have really been benefiting from my products, which again, I guess sort of comes back to being a bit less sort of rigid in my thought process than when I used to be. So for instance, people in the military or training for special forces selection use my bars as a really good, quick and ultra high energy nutritional source. But equally, individuals afflicted by autism really benefit from Phoenix bars as well, because a lot of them struggle to get nutrition on board, or their sort of dietary and nutritional preferences are very specific. They can only have a very specific looking, tasting, and texture sort of food. So that's another market that I've really been exploring. People with dysphagia or swallowing difficulties as well, because my bars are very soft, and you can also mix them with water to make a porridge or a smoothie as well, so they're quite versatile. And then also like eating disorder clinics as well, so people that have sort of recovered from the mental issues associated with eating disorders and now need to gain weight, people afflicted by operations. So essentially anyone that needs to gain weight due to an operation, an illness, etc., or just needs ultra high energy nutrition. I think there's a lot of niches that my product can really cater to, and it is just finding those sorts of needles in the haystack of the people that need my bars.
Absolutely love it, man. Absolutely love it. Very, very cool, and excited to follow the journey along, man. Jamie will do his nice final thoughts at the end, but I wanted to introduce the final question that I'm excited to hear your answer to, even though I think we're going to get a slightly different way of going around things, which is always cool. But if you could go back to a time, choose a time when it's most appropriate for you, maybe when you're in university thinking about ideas or growing the business. What is one thing you do the same? What is one thing you do differently? And what is one thing you tell yourself to motivate yourself?
I'm just trying to pretend like I didn't know the questions before you've asked me, and I'm giving them some thought. I think, as boring as it sounds, I'd say hustling and just like sending emails and doing the thing. I mean, it's something that I never really necessarily had a problem with doing, just because I was innately curious, interested in it. And I obviously didn't start out as I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it for 40 hours a week. It genuinely does start as I'm going to spend half an hour of my time like researching this one week, and then it starts as an hour the next week, and then it goes 2 hours, 4 hours, etc., etc. And you just sort of level up from that perspective. So I think just like hustling, doing the thing, and I guess exploring or following my curiosity is something that I definitely do again. Equally, to directly contradict myself again, I think maybe I could have gotten to places slightly quicker if I did take a step back and hustled a bit less. So being effective rather than like productive, and hopefully, I'm not sure if you have, Jamie, but Sol and I obviously reading the 4 Hour Work Week is something that comes up a lot about sort of being a bit more effective rather than just putting the hours in. And my best ideas normally come on like a really long walk, or when I actually take a couple of days away from my desk, which is becoming a bit harder and harder. So I guess working on the business rather than in the business is something I recommend to my younger self, but equally at the same time, those are the mistakes that you have to sort of go through to go down those like dark alleys, or pursue those dead things for you to actually realize that there wasn't an option there, or to really learn from it. And you will have to actually remind me of the last question because I've forgotten it.
It's one thing you tell yourself to motivate yourself. Hey, that's organic, right?
I think I actually don't really believe in motivation too much. I think there's a bit of activation energy always like required when you're like you need to get yourself to sit down at your desk. But I think genuinely most of the time, at least, like following what you're interested in and your curiosity is sort of enough. I'm sure like motivation is just genuinely quite fickle, and the people that rely on it too much are genuinely caught short. I'm sure you'll agree it's largely sort of habits, etc. But obviously there is a bit of activation energy needed, and I guess that only really comes up when you get as unhappy with where you're at. Like if you were really just not happy with selling enough bars, or you were really unhappy that your 5K time was so bad that you then become so like interested in actually doing something about it. So sometimes you do have to just like get to the point where you're like, I need to pick myself up, and it's quite hard to artificially induce that, which again, I haven't actually listened to too many of your guests give an answer to that question. I'm not sure if that's a silly answer or not, but hopefully it will provide a point of difference.
Absolutely spot on, mate. No, I thought all three of those questions were beautifully answered, to be honest. And yeah, throughout, it's been fascinating to listen to. I think it's just hopefully such a useful episode for people listening, that because when we explore paths and people are doing alternative careers, sometimes it's still going down other like jobs, but this is kind of entrepreneurship, right? And it becomes such a niche when you're talking about a product that never really heard of before, never really explored before in terms of what it actually is. So amazing to kind of hear your insights and the mindset and how you've approached it all. And I think it's been brilliant just to actually listen to the kind of key takeaways and what you've learned over the last 4 years, right? So amazing. And thank you very much for coming on. I know Sol appreciates it as well, and hopefully makes a very good episode. So thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely, I guess, a bit more sort of old-fashioned entrepreneurship, selling goods and all that sort of stuff. Not very, at the moment at least, sort of high-tech, Dubai-based consultancy services work. But hopefully it can be some sort of help for one or two people that are thinking of starting an FMCG business or something similar. So thank you very much for having me on, chat. So just check the time, and 45 minutes have flown by. So thanks so much for having me on, and looking forward to keeping up to date with the podcast. And already excited for part 2.
Amazing.
All right, mate. Absolutely love that. Very, very good to chat to someone. And as you said, we don't tend to chat to physical product people as much. So I enjoyed that. Do you want to fire off for the first takeaway?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of good takeaways from that conversation, to be honest. But my key one, which I really liked, and I don't think is something we've actually discussed before, is the fact that he suggested it's easier to aim for super high ambitions than it is to aim for just above average, and that's because everybody else is aiming for just above average. So, like he talked about it there, he wants to be the world #1 food aid supplier, which is a massive, massive aim. You know, he's aiming to be top of the food chain, if you pardon the pun, with his product. But it's easier to aim for that really than just trying to make a product that performs just above average, because that's what everyone else is going for, and you're just going to probably end up falling by the wayside like the majority of everybody else. And so that idea I thought was spot on, and something that actually I'm going to go away and think about, because I think it's a really good way to probably motivate yourself as well.
100% agreed. And I asked him for my takeaway. Like, I asked him about it on the podcast, but it was so interesting to see him chat about his experience with mentorship, because he was very grounded in a lot of his opinions because of what he spoke about with what his mentor got him to do. We say it a lot on this podcast. It's a cliche, but it is very hard to find people who understand the problems that you and he has in this space. And having a mentor for me made me feel so much better with my journey. And I think for both of us, for both you and him, I think very similar. So takeaway from me is to definitely someone should really invest or have a mentor, because it's so important to improve your confidence in the space.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and also links quite nicely to my final takeaway. Really, is that I guess there's no point having that mentor that you're talking about if you can't do what he talks about in terms of being malleable with your thoughts and beliefs, and just having that hunger and appetite to learn, which I think he talked about a lot. And he talked about, the good example that he used was the fact that when he went to his first event, he was absolutely rubbish as a salesman. He said it was no good, that first one, but practice makes perfect. He's gone again and again, and now he actually sees himself as quite good. But that's because he describes the mindset he has, that he really wants to learn along the way to get better, and he allows himself to be malleable. So he learns from practical experience, he learns from mentors, and it's obviously improved what he's now doing as a business, but also as a person behind that business. So yeah, that I would summarize purely as be malleable with your thoughts and learn and ability to learn.
Love it. 3 takeaways there. Aim high, look to have a mentor, and be malleable with your thoughts and be prepared to learn. Absolutely love that. Great episode. Great to have James on. Thank you very much for listening, and we will catch you next week.